Lonely dog finds family with elderly couple. Their bond is truly heartwarming. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. It was a chilly autumn morning in the quiet town of Fairview when a golden retriever named Max ambled down the nearly empty street. Wrapped snugly in an orange and green knitted sweater that had seen better days, Max exuded a forlorn aura, his big brown eyes scanning every house as though searching for something or someone. For months now, Max had wandered the streets, a lone figure in a town where everyone seemed to have someone. Though his golden coat still shone in the sunlight, it was clear to the townsfolk that Max was astray. His routine was as predictable as the sunrise. Each morning, he would leave the park where he slept under a worn-out picnic table, walk down Maple Street, and pause in front of the same house. A quaint little yellow home with white shutters and a porch swing that creaked with age. On that porch sat an elderly couple, Frank and Eleanor, sipping their morning coffee as they watched the world wake up. Frank and Eleanor had noticed Max weeks ago. At first, they thought he was just passing through, but the dog's consistent visits made them curious. Every day, Max would sit at the edge of their yard, his head tilted slightly as if contemplating whether he should approach. Eleanor had tried calling him once, her gentle voice laced with hope, but Max had only wagged his tail before retreating. "He's waiting for something," Eleanor said to Frank one morning as she watched Max settle into his usual spot. "Or someone." Frank, ever the pragmatist, shrugged. "He's probably just looking for food. Strays do that." But Eleanor wasn't convinced. There was a sadness in Max's eyes that tugged at her heartstrings. She couldn't help but wonder about his story. Had he been abandoned? Did he once have a family who loved him? Or was he born into this lonely existence, never knowing the warmth of a home? Determined to help, Eleanor began leaving out bowls of water and food. At first, Max was hesitant. He would sniff the offerings cautiously, his body tense as though expecting a trap. But hunger eventually won out, and soon, he was devouring the meals with gusto. Frank, though initially indifferent, found himself drawn to the dog's resilience. He started setting out an old blanket on the porch, hoping Max would use it on colder nights. One particularly blustery evening, as the wind howled through the trees and the rain lashed against the windows, Frank and Eleanor couldn't stop worrying about Max. The blanket they had left out was soaked, and the thought of the dog shivering in the storm was too much for Eleanor to bear. "We have to bring him inside," she said, her voice trembling with urgency. Frank hesitated. "He might not trust us enough to come in. And what if he's sick? Or dangerous?" "He's not dangerous, Frank," Eleanor insisted. "He's just scared. And he needs us," armed with an umbrella and a plate of leftover roast chicken. Eleanor stepped onto the porch and called out to Max. The dog was huddled under a tree, his wet fur plastered against his body. His eyes met Eleanor's, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Max stood up and began walking toward her. It was a chilly autumn morning in the quiet town of Fairview when a golden retriever named Max ambled down the nearly empty street. Wrapped snugly in an orange and green knitted sweater that had seen better days, Max exuded a forlorn aura, his big brown eyes scanning every house as though searching for something or someone. For months now, Max had wandered the streets, a lone figure in a town where everyone seemed to have someone. Though his golden coat still shone in the sunlight, it was clear to the townsfolk that Max was astray. His routine was as predictable as the sunrise. Each morning, he would leave the park where he slept under a worn-out picnic table, walk down Maple Street, and pause in front of the same house. A quaint little yellow home with white shutters and a porch swing that creaked with age. On that porch sat an elderly couple, Frank and Eleanor, sipping their morning coffee as they watched the world wake up. Frank and Eleanor had noticed Max weeks ago. At first, they thought he was just passing through, but the dog's consistent visits made them curious. Every day, Max would sit at the edge of their yard, his head tilted slightly as if contemplating whether he should approach. Eleanor had tried calling him once, her gentle voice laced with hope, but Max had only wagged his tail before retreating. "He's waiting for something," Eleanor said to Frank one morning as she watched Max settle into his usual spot. Or someone. Frank, ever the pragmatist, shrugged. He's probably just looking for food. Strays do that, but Eleanor wasn't convinced. There was a sadness in Max's eyes that tugged at her heartstrings. She couldn't help but wonder about his story. Had he been abandoned? Did he once have a family who loved him? Or was he born into this lonely existence, never knowing the warmth of a home? Determined to help, Eleanor began leaving out bowls of water and food. At first, Max was hesitant. He would sniff the offerings cautiously, his body tense as though expecting a trap. But hunger eventually won out, and soon, he was devouring the meals with gusto. Frank, though initially indifferent, found himself drawn to the dog's resilience. He started setting out an old blanket on the porch, hoping Max would use it on colder nights. One particularly blustery evening, as the wind howled through the trees and the rain lashed against the windows, Frank and Eleanor couldn't stop worrying about Max. The blanket they had left out was soaked, and the thought of the dog shivering in the storm was too much for Eleanor to bear. "We have to bring him inside," she said, her voice trembling with urgency. Frank hesitated. "He might not trust us enough to come in. And what if he's sick? Or dangerous?" "He's not dangerous, Frank," Eleanor insisted. "He's just scared. And he needs us." Armed with an umbrella and a plate of leftover roast chicken, Eleanor stepped onto the porch and called out to Max. The dog was huddled under a tree, his wet fur plastered against his body. His eyes met Eleanor's, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Max stood up and began walking toward her. Eleanor and Frank sat with Sarah on the porch, their emotions swirling as they pieced together Max's story. The news that Max had belonged to an elderly man struck a deep chord with them. It explained his dignified demeanor, his longing eyes, and his initial mistrust of strangers. He hadn't just been a stray dog. He had been grieving, lost in the world without his person. Sarah, noticing how attached Max had become to Eleanor and Frank, hesitated to suggest taking him back to her rescue. "He seems really happy here," she said softly, watching Max nuzzle Eleanor's hand. "If you're willing, maybe he's already found his new home." Eleanor's eyes brimmed with tears as she looked at Frank. "What do you think?" Frank, who had been silently stroking Max's fur, cleared his throat. "Well, it seems like the old boy has made up his mind, hasn't he?" Max wagged his tail as if in agreement, leaning against Frank's leg. The decision was unanimous. Max was now a permanent part of their family. From that day forward, Max became a cornerstone of Eleanor and Frank's daily lives. His presence filled their once quiet home with warmth and laughter. Max had a knack for sensing their moods, curling up beside them during moments of sadness and bounding around playfully when the house needed a spark of joy. One afternoon, Eleanor decided to take Max to the local park. It had been years since she'd walked there, but with Max by her side, she felt a newfound sense of adventure. As they strolled along the winding paths, children playing nearby pointed excitedly at Max's knitted sweater, a vibrant orange and green creation Eleanor had made herself. "Your dog is so cool," one little boy shouted, running up to pet Max. At first, Max stiffened, but when Eleanor knelt down and reassured him, he relaxed, letting the boy stroke his fur. "He's a very special dog," Eleanor said with a smile, feeling a swell of pride. Over time, Max became a beloved fixture in the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves began stopping by the house, eager to chat and bring treats for Max. It wasn't long before Max's reputation extended beyond the block. Local shop owners and cafe patrons would recognize him and wave enthusiastically. One particularly memorable day, Eleanor and Frank decided to host a small gathering in their backyard, inviting neighbors to get to know Max and each other. They set up a few tables, hung fairy lights, and prepared an assortment of finger foods. Max, wearing his favorite sweater, roamed the yard, greeting each guest as if he were the host. The event was a resounding success. People bonded over their shared affection for Max, and the backyard was filled with laughter and conversation. For Eleanor and Frank, the gathering marked a turning point. They no longer felt isolated or forgotten. Max had brought them a sense of community they hadn't experienced in years. As the weeks turned into months, Max's impact on Eleanor and Frank deepened. He became Frank's steadfast companion in the garage, sitting patiently as Frank worked on his wood carvings. Eleanor found joy in crafting new sweaters for Max, each one more intricate than the last. On quiet evenings, the three of them would sit together by the fireplace, the warmth of their bond wrapping around them like a blanket. But it wasn't just Eleanor and Frank who had changed. Max, too, had transformed. The once cautious dog now walked with confidence, his tail wagging freely. He had found his place in the world, and it was with the couple who had opened their hearts to him. One crisp autumn morning, as leaves scattered across the sidewalk, Eleanor and Frank decided to take Max for a drive to the countryside. They packed a small picnic, loaded Max into the car, and set off on the winding roads. The golden fields and rolling hills seemed to stretch endlessly, a reminder of the simple beauty in life. When they arrived at a serene meadow, Max bounded out of the car, his energy infectious. He darted through the tall grass, chasing butterflies and barking happily. Eleanor and Frank watched from a blanket, their hands clasped as they marveled at the joy Max brought into their lives. "I don't know how we got so lucky," Eleanor murmured, her voice thick with emotion. Frank nodded, his eyes never leaving Mac. "I think we were meant to find each other." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the meadow in a warm glow, Eleanor and Frank called Max back to them. He trotted over, his tongue lolling and his eyes sparkling with contentment. They sat together, the three of them, savoring the peace of the moment. Eleanor leaned her head on Frank's shoulder and whispered, "He's our miracle, isn't he?" Frank smiled, resting his hand on Max's back. "That he is." Max, as if understanding their words, nuzzled them both, his tail wagging softly. In that moment, under the vast expanse of the evening sky, it was clear that Max wasn't just a dog to Eleanor and Frank. He was family. And together, they had found the happiness they hadn't even known they were searching for. As the seasons changed, the bond between Max, Eleanor, and Frank only grew stronger. Winter brought a crisp chill to the air, and Eleanor's knitting needles worked overtime to keep Max outfitted in warm, cozy sweaters. He was a sight to behold in his festive red and white sweater during the holidays, drawing smiles from everyone who passed by their home. One snowy afternoon, Frank decided to take Max to the nearby lake, which had frozen over and become a popular spot for ice skaters. Frank wasn't much of a skater himself, but he thought Max might enjoy watching the children gliding across the ice. As they walked along the edge of the lake, Max tugged on his leash, eager to explore. A little girl with rosy cheeks and a bright pink scarf approached timidly. "Can I pet your dog?" she asked, her breath visible in the cold air. Frank smiled and nodded. "Of course. His name is Max." The girl knelt down, and Max immediately licked her mittened hand, eliciting a giggle. "He's so friendly," she exclaimed. Frank chuckled. "He's a good boy. He's brought a lot of happiness to our lives." As the girl returned to her family, Frank felt a surge of gratitude for the joy Max had brought not just to him and Eleanor, but to everyone they encountered. Max wasn't just their dog. He was a beacon of kindness and connection. Back at home, Eleanor was busy preparing a warm meal. The kitchen was filled with the comforting aroma of stew simmering on the stove and fresh bread baking in the oven. When Frank and Max returned, shaking off the snow, Eleanor greeted them with a smile. "How was the lake?" she asked, wrapping her arms around Frank and scratching Max behind the ears. "Busy," Frank replied, his cheeks red from the cold. "Max made a new friend, of course," Eleanor laughed, shaking her head. "He's quite the social butterfly." After dinner, the three of them settled into their usual routine by the fireplace. Max sprawled out on his favorite rug, his head resting on Eleanor's feet. As the fire crackled and the snow fell softly outside, Eleanor reached for Frank's hand. "You know," she began, her voice thoughtful, "it's amazing how one little dog has changed everything for us." Frank nodded, squeezing her hand. "He's given us a second chance, hasn't he? A second chance at finding joy, at connecting with the world. Eleanor smiled, her eyes glistening. I think he's shown us what we were missing all along. Over time, Eleanor and Frank began to document their adventures with Max. They kept a journal filled with stories and photos, capturing the moments that had brought them so much happiness. From Max's playful antics in the snow to his quiet companionship during long summer evenings, every memory was a treasure. One day, Eleanor decided to share Max's story with a local community group. She wrote a heartfelt post online, detailing how Max had come into their lives and transformed them. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people who had been touched by the story, sharing their own experiences with rescue animals and the ways pets had enriched their lives. Before long, Max became somewhat of a local celebrity. The town newspaper ran a feature on him, calling him the dog who brought a neighborhood together. Neighbors who had never spoken before began striking up conversations, united by their affection for Max. Inspired by the impact Max had made, Eleanor and Frank decided to organize a fundraiser for the local animal shelter. They hosted the event in their backyard, decorating it with twinkling lights and setting up tables with homemade treats. Max, wearing a special bow tie for the occasion, greeted every guest with wagging enthusiasm. The fundraiser was a huge success. The shelter received enough donations to cover medical expenses for dozens of animals, and several dogs and cats found new homes that very night. Eleanor and Frank beamed with pride, knowing they had helped make a difference. As they sat together after the event, watching Max curl up on his bed with a contented sigh, Eleanor turned to Frank. I think this was his purpose, she said softly. He was meant to find us, to bring us all together. Frank nodded, his eyes fixed on Max, and we were meant to give him the home he deserves. The years rolled on, and Max continued to be the heart and soul of Eleanor and Frank's lives. He was there for every milestone, every celebration, every quiet moment of reflection. When Frank's arthritis worsened and he could no longer work in his garage, Max was there, sitting by his side and providing comfort. When Eleanor had a brief health scare, Max refused to leave her side, his unwavering loyalty bringing her immense comfort. He was more than just a pet. He was family, a source of strength and love. As Max grew older, his muzzle turned gray, and his movements slowed, but his spirit remained as bright as ever. Eleanor and Frank adjusted their routines to accommodate him, taking shorter walks and ensuring he had plenty of soft places to rest. They cherished every moment, knowing that their time together was finite. One golden autumn afternoon, as the three of them sat on the porch, a neighbor stopped by with her young son. The boy, who had grown up watching Max from afar, asked shyly if he could pet him. Of course, Eleanor said, smiling warmly. The boy gently stroked Max's fur, his eyes wide with wonder. He's the best dog, he said earnestly. Eleanor and Frank exchanged a glance, their hearts swelling with gratitude. He really is, Frank said, his voice thick with emotion. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the porch in a warm glow, Max rested his head on Eleanor's lap, his tail wagging softly. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the love and connection he had helped create, it was clear that Max's journey had come full circle. He had found his forever home, and in doing so, he had given Eleanor and Frank the greatest gift of all, a life filled with love, purpose, and joy. As the seasons continued to change, Max's presence in Eleanor and Frank's lives became an integral part of their everyday routine. Their bond with Max wasn't just about companionship. It was about healing and rediscovery. For Eleanor, Max brought a renewed sense of purpose. For Frank, he brought a calmness that made the challenges of aging more bearable. One rainy afternoon, as Eleanor brewed tea in the kitchen, she noticed Frank sitting on the couch, gently stroking Max's fur. The radio played softly in the background, a nostalgic tune from their youth filling the room. Max had his head on Frank's lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. Eleanor paused, tea in hand, and marveled at how much joy this little dog had brought into their lives. Frank, she called softly, do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if Max hadn't shown up that day? Frank looked up, his face thoughtful. I don't think I'd want to imagine it, he replied. He's filled a space we didn't even know was empty. Max wagged his tail, as if he understood the conversation and agreed wholeheartedly. Eleanor chuckled and joined them on the couch, placing a warm cup of tea in Frank's hands. She scratched behind Max's ears, eliciting a soft groan of pleasure from him. Do you remember how stubborn he was when we first found him? Eleanor asked, smiling at the memory. Frank laughed. Stubborn? That's an understatement. He wouldn't even come inside the house without a bribe. Now look at him, Eleanor said, gesturing to Max, who was sprawled across the couch as if he owned it. Frank nodded. He's made this house feel alive again. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Eleanor suggested an idea that had been forming in her mind for weeks. Frank, what if we started volunteering at the animal shelter? Frank raised an eyebrow. At our age, why not? Eleanor replied. We're not getting any younger, but that doesn't mean we can't make a difference. Besides, think of all the other dogs out there who might need a chance like Max had. Frank considered this for a moment before nodding. You're right. Let's do it. The following week, Eleanor and Frank visited the local animal shelter. The staff was delighted to have volunteers with such a heartfelt story. Eleanor helped with paperwork and organizing events, while Frank took on the role of walking the dogs and helping socialize them. Max often accompanied them, acting as an ambassador of sorts. His calm and friendly demeanor had a soothing effect on the other animals, and he quickly became a favorite among the shelter staff and visitors. One day, during an adoption event at the shelter, a young couple approached Eleanor, their eyes lighting up as they saw Max. Is he available for adoption? The woman asked, kneeling to pet him. Eleanor laughed. Oh no, Max isn't up for adoption. He's our boy. The couple smiled, and the man said, he's such a wonderful dog. You can just feel the love he has for you. Eleanor nodded. He's taught us more about love and kindness than we could have imagined. The couple ended up adopting a shy little terrier named Daisy, and as they left the shelter, Eleanor couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. Helping these animals find their forever homes was a way of paying forward the gift Max had given them. As the years went by, Eleanor and Frank continued their work at the shelter, and their home remained a sanctuary for Max. He was slowing down now, spending more time napping in the sunlit corners of the house. But his spirit was as strong as ever, and his love for Eleanor and Frank never wavered. One crisp autumn morning, as the leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold, Max passed away peacefully in his sleep. Eleanor and Frank were heartbroken, but comforted by the knowledge that Max had lived a life filled with love and happiness. They held a small memorial in their backyard, inviting neighbors, friends, and shelter staff who had known Max. Everyone shared stories about how Max had touched their lives, and the air was filled with laughter and tears. Eleanor and Frank planted a tree in Max's honor, a sturdy oak that would grow and thrive for years to come. This will be his legacy, Frank said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes, a reminder of the love and joy he brought into the world. As the years continued, Eleanor and Frank carried Max's memory with them in everything they did. They remained active at the shelter, dedicating their efforts to helping animals in need. Max's story inspired countless others to adopt and give rescue animals a second chance. And though their home felt a little quieter without Max, it was filled with the echoes of the love and laughter he had brought into their lives. Eleanor and Frank knew they had been forever changed by that scrappy little dog who had wandered into their lives on a sunny afternoon, and they were grateful for every moment they had shared with him. Max's story became a testament to the power of love, compassion, and second chances. A story that Eleanor and Frank continued to tell, ensuring that his legacy would live on in the hearts of everyone who heard it. Years later, as Eleanor and Frank sat on their porch, the oak tree they planted for Max now towering above them, they reflected on how much their lives had transformed. The tree had become a focal point in their neighborhood, a symbol of resilience, love, and the quiet strength that Max had embodied. Children often played around its sturdy trunk, their laughter echoing through the street. Some of those children were from families who had adopted dogs through Eleanor and Frank's efforts at the shelter. Parents would wave to the elderly couple from across the street, grateful for the compassion and example they had set for the community. One day, a young woman approached the porch, holding the leash of a golden retriever that bore a striking resemblance to Max. Her eyes were filled with tears as she climbed the steps. "Are you Eleanor and Frank?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Frank nodded, standing to greet her. "That's us. What can we do for you?" The woman knelt beside her dog, scratching behind his ears. "My name is Claire. I adopted this guy, Charlie, a few years ago from the shelter. I just wanted to thank you both. I'd heard so much about Max and your work, and it inspired me to adopt Charlie when I was going through a really rough time." Eleanor smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. Max had a way of touching lives, even after he was gone. Claire nodded. "He did. Because of Max, I found Charlie. He's been my rock through everything. Losing my parents, starting a new job, and even battling anxiety. I don't know what I would have done without him." Frank rested a hand on Claire's shoulder. "That's Max's legacy, Claire. He taught us all how much love can heal." Claire stayed for tea, sharing stories about her life and how Charlie had become her constant companion. By the time she left, Eleanor and Frank felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that Max's impact continued to ripple through the lives of others. Over the following years, the shelter's work expanded, thanks in part to donations and volunteers inspired by Max's story. Eleanor and Frank became honorary ambassadors for the shelter, often speaking at events and sharing the lessons Max had taught them. Their words moved audiences, and their story reminded people that even the smallest act of kindness could lead to profound change. As time went on, the oak tree in their yard became a gathering place for the neighborhood. It stood as a silent witness to the love that had grown within Eleanor and Frank's home. On its branches, children tied ribbons in honor of their pets, past and present. Some even carved small hearts and initials into the bark, leaving marks that would endure for generations. Eleanor and Frank's lives came to be defined not by their age or limitations, but by the legacy of love they had built with Max's help. They became a beacon of hope for those who felt lost or overlooked, showing that second chances were not just for the animals they saved, but for the people who opened their hearts to them. In their final years, Eleanor and Frank often found themselves sitting beneath Max's tree, holding hands and watching the world go by. They felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that their lives had been enriched in ways they never could have imagined. Max had given them more than companionship. He had given them a reason to keep growing, loving, and giving back. When the time came for Eleanor and Frank to leave this world, the community gathered to celebrate their lives. Their legacy was remembered through the countless animals they had helped and the people they had inspired. The oak tree stood tall, its branches swaying gently in the breeze, as if whispering a final goodbye. Years later, a plaque was placed at the base of the tree. It read, "In loving memory of Eleanor, Frank, and Max, a bond that changed lives forever. May their legacy inspire us all to love unconditionally and give second chances." And so, their story lived on, a timeless reminder of the profound impact that love, kindness, and one little dog could have on the world. As the years passed, the community continued to honor Eleanor, Frank, and Max's memory in ways that ensured their legacy endured. The oak tree in their front yard became a landmark, often referred to as Max's tree. It was more than a tree. It was a symbol of the love that had brought an entire neighborhood together. The shelter, which Eleanor and Frank had supported so passionately, was renamed the Max Haven Animal Shelter. A mural was painted on one of its walls, depicting Max standing proudly with Eleanor and Frank, surrounded by other rescued animals. Visitors often stopped to admire the artwork, touched by the story behind it. The shelter thrived, becoming a place not only for rescuing animals, but also for fostering community connections. Regular events like adoption fairs and community dog walks were held in Max's honor, attracting families from all over the city. One particularly special event was the annual Max Day, celebrated on the anniversary of Max's adoption. People brought their pets, shared stories of how their furry companions had changed their lives, and donated generously to support the shelter. The event grew larger each year, with local businesses and organizations sponsoring activities like pet parades, training demonstrations, and even a best-dressed dog contest. Max's story also inspired a local author to write a children's book titled Max's Second Chance. It followed the tale of a lonely dog who found a loving home with an elderly couple and ended up changing their lives in ways they never expected. The book became a bestseller, touching hearts across the country and introducing Max's legacy to a whole new generation. Schools incorporated the book into their curriculum, using it to teach children about compassion, kindness, and the importance of caring for animals. Back in the neighborhood, Max's tree continued to be a gathering spot. Couples would sit beneath it for picnics, children would play around its roots, and people walking their dogs often stopped to pay their respects. It became a tradition for those who adopted pets from the shelter to tie ribbons around the tree's branches, each ribbon representing a new beginning for an animal in need. One day, a young family moved into Eleanor and Frank's house. At first, they were unsure about living in a home with so much history attached to it. But as they learned about Eleanor, Frank, and Max, they felt honored to carry on the legacy. They decided to keep the house open to the community, hosting small gatherings under the tree and continuing the tradition of caring for animals. The couple adopted a golden retriever from the Max Haven Animal Shelter, a lively dog named Daisy. Though she was different from Max, Daisy had the same loving spirit and quickly became a beloved member of the neighborhood. She had a knack for comforting people, sensing when someone needed a little extra love. Many said she was Max's spirit, watching over the community in a new form. Years later, a local journalist wrote an article titled The Legacy of Max: How One Dog Changed a Community Forever. It chronicled the story of Max, Eleanor, and Frank, as well as the ripple effects of their love and kindness. The article went viral, bringing even more attention to the Max Haven Animal Shelter. Donations poured in, allowing the shelter to expand its facilities and rescue even more animals. The story of Max became a shining example of how a single act of love could grow into something extraordinary. It wasn't just about rescuing a dog. It was about the way that love inspired others to open their hearts and give back. Max had taught the world that second chances weren't just for the animals in need. They were for everyone willing to open their hearts and take a chance on something beautiful. And so, the story of Max, Eleanor, and Frank became a part of the community's identity. A story passed down from generation to generation, reminding everyone of the transformative power of love, kindness, and second chances. The influence of Max, Eleanor, and Frank's story continued to grow, transcending the boundaries of their small neighborhood and touching lives far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Over time, their legacy inspired a movement that emphasized the value of compassion, the importance of second chances, and the undeniable bond between humans and animals. The annual Max Day celebration became so popular that other cities and towns began hosting their own versions of the event, often partnering with local animal shelters to raise awareness about pet adoption and animal welfare. These events were more than just celebrations. They were catalysts for change, sparking conversations about how communities could come together to support each other and care for the vulnerable. The Max Haven Animal Shelter became a model for other shelters around the country. Its innovative programs, like therapy dog training and community outreach, were adopted by shelters nationwide. One particularly successful initiative was the Eleanor's Companions program, which paired senior citizens with rescue animals. The program provided free veterinary care, pet food, and training support, ensuring that elderly individuals could experience the joy and companionship of having a pet without worrying about financial burdens. Countless seniors reported feeling a renewed sense of purpose and happiness after joining the program, crediting it with transforming their lives. Recognizing the widespread impact of Max's story, local leaders and philanthropists collaborated to establish the Max's Legacy Foundation. The foundation's mission was simple yet profound: to create a world where every animal had a loving home and every human experienced the joy of unconditional love from a pet. The foundation funded shelters, provided grants to animal welfare organizations, and supported education initiatives aimed at promoting kindness and empathy in schools. One of the foundation's most notable projects was the creation of Max's Parks, a series of dog-friendly parks designed to foster connections between people and their pets. Each park featured walking trails, agility courses, and quiet spaces for reflection. At the entrance of every park stood a bronze statue of Max, depicted with his signature gentle gaze and wagging tail. The inscription read, "In loving memory of Max, who taught us the power of love and second chances." The story of Max, Eleanor, and Frank eventually caught the attention of a prominent filmmaker who saw its potential to inspire even more people. The resulting movie, Max's Miracle, became an instant hit. It chronicled the journey of a lonely dog who brought a fractured community together and reminded everyone of what truly mattered. Audiences laughed, cried, and left theaters feeling a renewed sense of hope. The film's success brought Max's story to an international audience, with fans from around the world sharing their own stories of how pets had changed their lives. Social media was flooded with hashtags like #MaxesLegacy and #SecondChances, creating a global community of people united by their love for animals and their belief in the transformative power of kindness. Back in the neighborhood, the young family who had moved into Eleanor and Frank's house continued to uphold their legacy. Their golden retriever, Daisy, became a cherished part of the community, often visiting schools, hospitals, and nursing homes as a certified therapy dog. Children loved hearing stories about Max and often asked their parents to read Max's Second Chance to them at bedtime. The family also started a tradition of hosting storytelling nights under Max's tree. Neighbors gathered with blankets and lanterns to share tales of their own pets and the lessons they had learned from them. These evenings fostered a deep sense of connection and reminded everyone of the importance of coming together as a community. One evening, a young boy named Ethan stood up to share his story. He had recently adopted a shy, timid dog named Rosie from the Max Haven Animal Shelter. At first, Rosie had been too scared to come out of her crate, but with patience and love, Ethan had helped her gain confidence. "Rosie taught me that sometimes you just need someone to believe in you," Ethan said, his voice trembling with emotion. The crowd erupted in applause, moved by the wisdom of such a young boy. The ripple effects of Max's story extended far beyond the community. Inspired by the movement, schools began incorporating lessons about empathy and animal welfare into their curriculums. Teachers used Max's Second Chance as a teaching tool, encouraging students to think about how small acts of kindness could make a big difference. One school even organized a kindness challenge, where students competed to see who could perform the most acts of kindness in a month. The challenge wasn't limited to helping animals. Students also volunteered at soup kitchens, helped elderly neighbors with chores, and wrote letters of encouragement to classmates. By the end of the month, the school had created a mosaic made up of the hundreds of kind acts performed, with Max's face at its center. The corporate world also took notice. Several companies partnered with the Max Haven Animal Shelter, offering paid volunteer days for employees to help at the shelter. One tech company even implemented a pet adoption bonus, providing employees with financial support when they adopted a rescue animal. As the years went by, Max's tree grew taller and stronger, its branches providing shade for countless gatherings, and its roots anchoring it firmly in the community's heart. The ribbons tied around its branches multiplied, each one representing a life saved and a second chance given. Visitors from all over the world came to see the tree, often leaving behind handwritten notes expressing how Max's story had inspired them. One note, written by a woman who had traveled from another country, read, "Max reminded me that love is the greatest gift we can give and receive. Thank you for sharing his story with the world." The neighborhood itself became a symbol of what was possible when people chose love and kindness over indifference. It wasn't perfect, no place was, but it was a community that tried, every day, to live up to the lessons Max had taught them. In the end, Max's story wasn't just about one dog or one couple. It was about all of us, the ways we're connected, the ways we can lift each other up, and the ways we can create a better world, one small act of kindness at a time. As dusk settled over the neighborhood on a warm summer evening, Daisy lay under Max's tree, her golden fur glowing in the soft light. Children played nearby, their laughter filling the air, while neighbors chatted and shared stories. In that moment, it was clear, Max's legacy wasn't just alive, it was thriving, and it would continue to thrive In every act of kindness, every second chance given, and every life touched by love.